Hello everybody, so today I want to quickly just look at some physical properties and how they work within your pop network. So let's first of all create one. So I'm just gonna use, maybe I'll use a cube this time just to be a bit wild. And then I'm going to move this up a little bit. So let's move this up, maybe just translate 2. Actually, let's go more than that. Let's go 4. All right. And I want to now include my pop network. If you're not sure how to do this, we've done this before in previous lessons, so you can easily catch up with that. Now we've got our pop object, our pop source. I don't need this if you remember. And I've got my pop solver. If I look here, I'm just adding a bunch of points. I'm going to probably make this a bit less. Let's have the birth rate at just 1000 to make that a little easier to see. Okay, and then let's add the gravity. Okay, how's that going? Yep, that looks good. And finally, I need to enter my ground plane. Let's do that. Add a merge. Alright, I'm just kind of muttering to myself here while we set this up. Alright, that looks good. And I'm going to set this, remember, to mutual. Alright, so now I can see that I've finally got some particles. They're affected by gravity and they hit the floor and they bounce a bit there that you can see. A little bit of bouncing. Brilliant. Now let's remember what happens if I change this velocity. So if I go into my attributes, let's set initial velocity, okay, and let's make this, for example, 1. And then I can see that this bounces, but remember it stayed on one particular spot. Let's maybe make this 8, make it a bit bigger. And you can see it bounced on one spot. Now, have a little think. What did you do in order to fix that? Well, the problem, if you remember, was the physical attributes. Now we can look at let's start with the ground plane, and we can see that we've got this bounce here, right? But we also had this friction. The friction was a 1. If I reduce that to 0, now I've got things bouncing. And now if you're in previous versions of Houdini, this might actually be already set to 0, but I think over the last 2 years or so, this has been by default set to 1. Now the only ones I really use here are the bounce and the friction. Let's take another look at the bounce here, and I'm going to reduce the friction just a bit. Let's see how that looks. Not great. Maybe I'm going to, let's get rid of this velocity here, and instead I'm going to use that variance. Let's see how that is. Okay, yeah, I guess. In fact, what I might do is change the angle of this ground plane. Maybe this will make it a bit easier. Sorry for this. Okay, so let's go into the ground plane, initial state. Yeah, okay. And then I'm going to rotate this a little bit. All right, like that. Now this might work a bit better. All right, now I can see it's bouncing and trying to roll, but not really getting anywhere. Again, I might remove this variance actually. I'm now just fussing. Alright. All of these are in previous lessons, what I'm doing now. And now I'm going to go into my ground plane, look at the physical and remove the friction. Let's see what we get now. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So let's look at the bounce first of all. Here I've got a bounce of 0.5, which isn't much. But if I put a bounce on, say, 1, it should bounce up to around the place where it originally comes from. So let's do that. And that's a pretty strong bounce, but, you know, it's certainly possible. I would say, however, that this is probably the maximum that you want to go with your bounce. Hence the reason why on this slider here, 1 is the maximum. You can go down a lot, of course. Where now it's just pretty much hitting and sliding down. Now if I go above 1, let's say I go to 2, watch what happens. But I should scroll back a bit here. Alright, let's take a look. and then it goes, whoa, very high, and then again, second time round, it goes even higher, and it will just continue like that for eternity. So 2, as you can see, looks very unrealistic. I'm not sure, there might be a situation where you want to use that, but I highly doubt it. So let's remove this back to the default of 0.5. Alright, let's look at that. Okay, and I'm going to change the friction a little bit. So let's have the friction to say 0.8. See how this goes. And I can see here it's pretty much getting stopped at some point. Here it's just kind of sticky because the friction is quite high. Let's make it a bit lower and check that out. Oh, kind of the same. Let me go even less than that. Let's see what this does. Alright, now I'm getting what I would expect, where these things are now sliding down. Now, of course, it depends what you're actually using here, the particles for, and what they represent. If it was, say, I don't know, grains of sand, it's probably not going to do this. It's going to eventually clump up, and so you're going to get something with sand. Let me go even higher than that. So with sand, for example, I'm going to more likely get something like this, and of course without the bounce too. So let's reduce that. Oh, a bit too much maybe, and let me go reduce the friction slightly. Let's see what this is like. Okay, and sand will probably do something maybe a bit like that. I'm going to reduce this a bit more. I would expect it to slide a little bit also. Let's have a look. Okay, so it's probably going to react something a bit more like that. I don't know why I'm using sand as an example, but you get the idea, right? It's hard to find that little balance point there where I want it to slide a little bit. There we go, probably more like that. Okay, where it would slide slightly and then come to a standstill. Things like grains of rice as well might have a bit more of a sticky factor to them. But in this particular case, it's actually looking at the physical ground plane. Now there is another area where this can happen. So let's go to 0.5, and I'm going to put this on 0. So we're going back to where we were before. Okay, and another area where I can find the physical properties will also be in this pop object. So this is from the particles themselves, not the ground plane. Let's go into physical, and I'm going to reduce my bounce. Okay, and you can see there the bounce is very much lowered, and so it's not being affected so much. Here it's a bit stronger, and at 1 it's about half of that. Now, I mean about half of the bounce that I would expect, maybe even a quarter, and that's because of course you have to find this balancing act now between the ground plane and between the pop object. I'm going to also remove this friction again. Let's see how that goes. Okay, and it's got slightly less friction on there, but you get the idea. So you've got to find this balancing act. Most of the time I just use the ground plane, and I tend to just try and use the physical properties here, but at times if you want a more realistic effect, you might have to also include this pop object and the physical properties within there. Hope I've got that right. So if you have any questions or comments, of course, please leave them below, and you guys have a great day. All right, bye bye.